Still remember the first night I heard it. A sound so relentless and unyielding that it shattered my sense of normalcy and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. It began as a barely perceptible murmur, like the soft rustle of leaves on a windy autumn night. But as I lay in bed in my cramped apartment on the edge of Des Moines, that sound grew louder and more insistent, creeping into every silent corner of my existence until it was impossible to ignore. At first, I assumed it was the neighbor's ancient radiator or the hum of a distant air conditioner, but soon I discovered that this was no ordinary noise. It was as if the sound had a life of its own, an endless, hypnotic drone that reverberated through my bones and refused to be silenced by sleep or distraction. My nights turned into a waking nightmare as the sound relentlessly pulsed at odd intervals, sometimes a low, mournful wail that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth, and other times a sharp, piercing shriek that shattered the stillness of midnight, each variation filling me with an inexplicable dread and a sense that something was coming for me. Driven by both terror and a desperate need for answers, I began recording the sound with every piece of equipment I had. Digital recorders, my smartphone, even an old cassette deck salvaged from my father's attic, hoping that if I could capture the noise, I might uncover its source and break its eerie spell. The recordings, however, revealed nothing but a continuous, unchanging frequency that defied analysis, a spectral pulse that seemed to vibrate just below the threshold of human hearing, as if it were not meant for mortal ears. Over the next several nights, as the sound grew in intensity, my life began to unravel. I found myself unable to focus at work, my mind consumed by the relentless chorus of this invisible menace. I would sit at my desk, eyes fixed on a blinking cursor, while in the back of my mind the sound echoed louder than ever, a constant reminder of a presence I could neither see nor escape. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by an endless vigil in a darkened room lit only by the cold glow of my computer screen and the faint red light of a digital clock counting down the seconds of another restless night. In one particularly harrowing episode, I awoke in a cold sweat to the sound of my front door creaking open, only to find the hallway empty, save for the unnerving, omnipresent drone that seemed to be emanating from the very walls themselves. My heart hammered in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but every call I made ended abruptly, the line filled with nothing but that maddening sound. As the days bled into nights, I began to notice unsettling details, shadows that danced just beyond the edge of my vision, whispers that accompanied the relentless noise, and a series of cryptic messages scrawled in a language I couldn't understand on the peeling wallpaper of my apartment. Desperate for help, I turned to local paranormal investigators, but even they were baffled. One of them, a gaunt man with hollow eyes named Darren, told me that the sound seemed to be linked to an old urban legend, a curse born from the sorrow of a long-forgotten tragedy, a sound that was said to be the mourning cry of a spirit condemned to wander the earth in eternal anguish. Darren claimed that he had encountered similar reports in remote towns and desolate rural areas, all converging on one singular phenomenon, a persistent, unyielding noise that defied all attempts at silence, as if it were an echo from another world, a world where suffering and despair reigned supreme. His words only deepened my sense of foreboding, and I began to document every moment of my torment in a series of video logs, hoping that sharing my story on my YouTube channel would not only serve as a cathartic release, but also warn others of the inexplicable terror that had taken hold of my life. I described in detail how the sound would sometimes swell to an almost unbearable crescendo, a cacophony of overlapping tones that sent vibrations through the floor and left my teeth chattering in the cold night air, only to suddenly drop to a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to seep into my very soul. Each fluctuation in the sound felt like a heartbeat of some monstrous entity, each pause pregnant with the possibility of something unspeakably horrifying about to occur. One night, after weeks of enduring the torment, I decided to confront the source head-on. Armed with a high-powered recorder, a flashlight, and a determination fueled by equal parts fear and desperation, I ventured out into the deserted streets of my neighborhood, following the sound as it led me down a labyrinth of shadowed alleys and abandoned lots. The deeper I went, the more the urban landscape transformed into something alien, a distorted version of the familiar, where the once bright neon signs flickered with a ghostly pallor, and the pavement seemed to pulsate with the same eerie rhythm as the relentless sound. I found myself drawn to an old, dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, a structure so forgotten by time that even the local vagrants avoided its vicinity. As I stepped through the broken doors, the sound enveloped me completely, a tidal wave of noise that drowned out my own thoughts and set my nerves ablaze. The interior of the warehouse was a vast expanse of darkness, punctuated only by the occasional glimmer of moonlight filtering through shattered windows, and in that oppressive silence between the sound's pulsations, I felt as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets of ancient sorrows. I began to record everything, every creak of the floor, every murmur of the unseen, as I moved deeper into the heart of the building. Suddenly, the sound intensified, morphing into what I can only describe as a chorus of anguished voices, a dissonant symphony that seemed to cry out in unison, lamenting a tragedy long past, yet ever present in the echoes of time. In that moment, I realized that the sound was not a mere auditory phenomenon, but a living entity, a manifestation of an ancient curse, a perpetual mourning that transcended the bounds of life and death. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread as I stumbled upon a room at the back of the warehouse, its walls adorned with faded photographs and handwritten notes in a language I couldn't decipher. In the center of the room lay an old, rusted gramophone, its horn warped and cracked, yet it pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy that seemed to synchronize perfectly with the relentless sound. My heart pounded as I reached out to touch it, and in that instant, the room exploded with the cacophonous chorus, the sound now a living roar that vibrated through every fiber of my being, a sound that was at once both a dirge and a warning. I was thrown to the ground, my mind teetering on the brink of madness as visions of endless corridors and tortured faces flashed before my eyes. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there, paralyzed by fear and overwhelmed by the unceasing din, until slowly, as if in response to some unspoken command, the noise began to ebb, receding into a low, sorrowful murmur that left behind an oppressive silence. In that silence, I could almost hear my own heartbeat, a reminder that I was still alive, still tethered to a reality that had suddenly become so fragile, so impermanent. I struggled to my feet and fled the warehouse, the echoes of that unholy sound following me like a relentless specter. Back in the relative safety of my apartment, I tried to rationalize what had happened, convincing myself that it was merely a product of my frayed nerves and the stress of isolation. Yet even as I attempted to return to normalcy, the sound continued to haunt me, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity, as if it were seeping into the very fabric of my existence. My once peaceful nights were now punctuated by the relentless drone, and no matter how I tried to drown it out, with music, with silence, with the white noise of a television, it persisted, a constant reminder that something beyond my control had marked me. My friends noticed a change in me. I became withdrawn, my eyes haunted by a terror I could neither fully explain nor escape. I found myself compelled to document every unsettling occurrence in meticulous detail, my video logs a desperate plea for understanding and a warning to anyone who might one day encounter the same curse. I recounted the moments when the sound would suddenly burst forth in a crescendo that rendered me speechless, when I would lie awake in bed, heart hammering in my chest, as the noise filled every corner of my mind with images of unspeakable horror. In those sleepless hours, I began to see things. A fleeting glimpse of a figure standing at the foot of my bed, the outline of a face pressed against the window as if trying to communicate a silent warning, and, most disturbingly, reflections of my own terrified expression in surfaces where no one should have been able to see it. Desperation drove me to seek out others who might understand, to comb through online forums and obscure chat rooms where whispers of the sound and the never-ending wail were shared like urban legends passed down in hushed tones. I found stories that mirrored my own experience, accounts from strangers who had been similarly tormented by an incessant noise that defied explanation, a noise that some claimed was the harbinger of a curse, a sound that was the lament of a spirit trapped between worlds, doomed to echo its sorrow through the ages. One particular post caught my eye, written by a user known only as Nocturnal, who described how the sound had driven him to the brink of madness, how it had seeped into his dreams and warped his waking life into a perpetual nightmare. He wrote of nights spent in a state of half-conscious terror, his mind bombarded by the relentless drone and his soul slowly eroded by the unyielding melancholy of a sound that refused to cease. His final words, an anguished plea for release, haunt me to this day, a reminder that some curses are not easily undone. With each passing day, the sound grew more insistent, more invasive, until I could no longer ignore the possibility that it was more than just an auditory anomaly. It was a manifestation of an ancient sorrow, a curse born from a tragedy so profound that its echoes had spilled over into our modern world. In my darkest moments, I began to wonder if the sound was a message, a desperate cry from a lost soul yearning to be freed from an eternal prison of despair, or perhaps a warning from the other side, cautioning me against meddling in forces far beyond human comprehension. The turning point came one night, when the relentless drone was suddenly replaced by a series of disjointed voices, overlapping and discordant, each one whispering fragments of a story that sent shivers down my spine. I could barely make out the words, a name, a date, and a chilling refrain that repeated over and over, as if in a trance. Forever lost, forever bound. In that moment, I realized that the sound was not merely a curse imposed upon me by chance, but a deliberate communication from an entity older than time, one that had chosen me as its unwilling conduit. My recordings now contained not just the unceasing noise, but moments of clarity, a brief pause where a coherent sentence emerged, a whispered plea for redemption, and an undercurrent of grief that resonated with the weight of centuries. I began to piece together the fragments, slowly unraveling a narrative of loss and betrayal, of a family torn apart by a tragedy so horrific that their souls had been condemned to wander in eternal lament. The sound was their collective mourning, their voices fused into one endless dirge, reaching out across the void in a futile attempt to be heard, to be remembered. As I delved deeper into this macabre mystery, my own sense of identity began to blur. I found myself questioning whether I was simply an observer, or if the curse had somehow intertwined my fate with that of the lost souls behind the sound. I started to experience vivid hallucinations, moments when the boundaries between the living and the dead dissolved, and I could see fleeting images of a sorrowful family, their eyes hollow and filled with an unending grief, silently pleading for someone to break the cycle of their eternal torment. In one harrowing vision, I saw a young girl, no more than 7 years old, standing in the center of a dilapidated living room, her face streaked with tears, as she reached out toward me with arms that trembled as if burdened by an unbearable sorrow. The image was so visceral that I could almost feel the chill of her touch, a cold that seeped deep into my bones and left me shivering long after the vision had faded. Terrified yet compelled to understand, I began to trace the origins of the curse through old newspapers, public records, and whispered legends among the local residents. I discovered that nearly 50 years ago, a family had vanished without a trace from a quiet suburban neighborhood, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and a home that was soon abandoned and left to rot. The details were murky, a string of misfortunes, inexplicable disappearances, and persistent rumors of strange sounds emanating from the empty house. But one thing was clear. The tragedy had left an indelible mark on the community, a wound that never healed and festered in the dark corners of collective memory. As I pieced together the story, I began to feel the oppressive weight of destiny settling upon me, as though the relentless sound had chosen me to bear witness to a sorrow too great for any one person to endure. I documented my findings in a series of late-night video logs, each one more desperate and haunted than the last, my voice trembling as I recounted the fragments of history that hinted at a cursed legacy, a family whose grief had transcended death, whose mournful cries had fused with the very fabric of time to create a sound that could never be silenced. The final, irrevocable moment came on a night when the sound reached its zenith, a cacophonous, almost unbearable symphony of despair that seemed to shake the very foundations of my apartment. I was alone in the darkness, the only light the flicker of my camera, recording my every move, when the sound abruptly stopped. For a few agonizing seconds, there was only silence, a silence so profound it seemed to press in on me from every direction, before a single, clear voice broke through, whispering directly into my ear, "Your soul is ours now." In that instant, every rational thought fled, replaced by an overwhelming terror that rooted me to the spot. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the ghostly cadence of that final message, and as I tried to scream, I realized that my voice had been stolen by the darkness. The silence that followed was even more horrifying than the sound, a void where hope and sanity were drained away, leaving only a bitter taste of despair. I fled my apartment that night, my belongings scattered in my frantic escape, driven by the primal urge to outrun the curse that had claimed me. Yet no matter where I went, into crowded streets or remote corners of the city, the sound persisted, a constant companion that whispered of my inevitable fate. Now, as I sit in a cold, sterile motel room far from the life I once knew, I continue to record every instance of that relentless noise, every spectral whisper that hints at a future bound by sorrow and darkness. My recordings have become a testament to a curse that defies logic and reason, a curse that reminds me, with every heartbeat and every echo of that unyielding sound, that some horrors are eternal, that some voices, once heard, never fade into silence. I share my story in the hope that someone somewhere might understand the true weight of this curse and the danger of listening too closely to the sound that never stops. And so I leave you with a question that haunts me still. Have you ever encountered a sound so unceasing, so laden with despair, that it made you wonder whether the very fabric of your reality was unraveling? Would you dare to listen when the silence finally shatters at 3:33 a.m.?